Aside from upsetting our livestock, Kamba's favorite thing to do was hunt. By this time, going hunting had replaced most of the childhood games I used to play at home, and Kamba provided the perfect partner. During the dry season, we hunted birds that drank from the dambo near my home, and in the rainy months we followed them into the blue gum forest, where we set our traps and waited in the thickets. This kind of hunting required patience and quiet. Kamba seemed to understand this naturally, as if he'd been hunting his whole life. One morning, after the rains had stopped, Kamba and I headed to the forest to set our traps. As always, I kept my tools and trap-making materials inside a cloth sack that I tied to the end of my hoe. Inside were a rubber bicycle tube, a broken bicycle spoke, a short piece of wire that I clipped from my mother's clothesline, a handful of maize chaff that we call gaga, and 4 heavy bricks. I also carried 2 knives that I crafted myself. The first was made from a thick piece of iron sheeting. After tracking a pattern in the metal, I'd taken a nail and poked holes all around the edges, then popped it out with a wrench. I sharpened the metal into a blade by rubbing it against a flat stone. For my handle, I wrapped the bottom half with plastic jumbo bags and melted them over a fire to make them hard. My second knife was a punching tool made from a sharpened nail, also equipped with a handle. I kept them both tucked inside the waistband of my trousers. We entered the forest just past the graveyard, near Jeffrey's house, where the blue gums grew tall. In the distance, I could see the small mountain range called the Dawa Highlands that separated us from Lake Malawi, some 100 kilometers away. Dark clouds clung to the tops of the green hills, threatening rain. "Let's hurry, Kamba. We don't want to get wet." I found a good spot off the main trail to set our trap, then got to work. The type of trap I used is called a chikwapa. To make it, I first cleared a small section of grass and vines with my hoe until I could see the red dirt. Taking my knife, I cut 2 thick branches from a blue gum tree and whittled them to sharp points. Then I pushed them into the soft dirt and made sure they didn't move. I cut the bicycle tube into 2 strips and tied each piece to the ends of the steel clothesline wire. Then tied the rubber strips to the poles. When finished, it resembled a giant slingshot. The bark from a kachera tree is papery and durable and makes a fine rope. I stripped several long sections and tied them together and made a rope about 15 feet long. I attached it to the steel wire in my slingshot. Then I pulled the rubber as far as I could go, locking it between 2 bicycle spokes sticking out of the ground. This was my trigger. Once it was set, I stacked the 4 bricks directly behind the trap and sprinkled some gaga on the ground. Whenever birds landed to eat the bait, I'd pull the trigger and release the rubber sling, slamming them into the bricks. "Let's hunt," I said. Kamba's ears perked at the command, and he followed me into the trees. We hid behind a small bush and waited for our game. About 30 minutes later, a small flock of 4 birds swooped overhead and spotted the bait. I felt my pulse quicken as they turned and feathered down. I was about to pull the trigger when a 5th bird landed. He was giant, with a fat gray chest and yellow wings. "Come on," I thought, "just a little more to the right. That's it." The fat bird pushed his way into the group and began to feed. With all the birds now inside the trap, I jerked the rope. Woo, pop! The whole flock disappeared into a cloud of feathers and dust. "Tonga!" I shouted. Kamba and I raced out to investigate. 4 birds lay dead against the bricks while a 5th managed to fly away. I picked them up and brushed away the dirt, their limp bodies still warm in my hands. I placed them in my pockets. "Now comes the fun part," I said. Kamba's tail was wagging like mad. "Let's go eat." Back at the house, I cleaned the birds and sprinkled the meat with a coat of salt. I then sharpened a blue gum sapling and ran it through the birds like a skewer. In the kitchen, I gathered a handful of sticks and built a small fire. Once my coals glowed red, I helped the birds over the embers until each one was sizzling and brown. The delicious smell soon drew my sisters to the door, begging for a taste. My father had to intervene. "Leave those guys alone. The 2 hunters worked hard today. Now let them enjoy their prize." The forest birds were small and bony, each one just a mouthful of meat. But even still, they tasted delicious. Kamba didn't worry about bones at all. just swallowed his birds in one quick gulp and wagged his tail for more. I started laughing. When it comes to hunting, you're very patient, I told him. But when it's time to eat, that's another story.